The story begins in a royal court that feels both ancient and strangely modern, with electric fans and a typewriter in the room. The king asks about the railway repair work. The minister responds that it will take another 3 months to complete. The king, clearly displeased, demands the work be completed in 1 month. This shocks the ministers, who argue that such a rush schedule will put too much strain on workers and slaves. As the historian types about the king's virtues, and how he cares for those who are overworked, the ministers beg him to reconsider his decision for the people's well-being. Yet the king questions why the ministers care about the people, and if they are so concerned, they should join the workers themselves. This terrifies the ministers as they wonder if the king is serious. The king leans back in his chair, a sinister smile creeping across his face as he holds a disposable cup, another stark contrast to the era. He asks if he should assume that the repairs will indeed be completed in 1 month. The ministers stammer in agreement, as the historian nervously types away. Suddenly, the king turns his attention to him, questioning what he is typing and whether he is cursing at him. The historian panics and insists that he is simply focused on his work. The king threatens to send him back to administrative training if he does not meet expectations. The historian's face pales as he assures the king of his dedication and willingness to serve. As tensions ease, the king says he's hungry, dismisses the court, and tells them to return in 30 minutes. Once alone, the king relaxes back into his seat with a sigh of relief, sipping from his disposable cup and grumbling about his inefficient ministers. As he idly wonders about some flying plane, we get a glimpse of the ancient city full of modern elements like electric poles and railways, showing that this is a world where past and future collide. Meanwhile, in a faraway smithy, the clang of metal rings through the air. Kim Chino hammers and shapes a glowing piece of iron, before plunging it into water. Engrossed in his work, he doesn't notice his phone ringing. Suddenly, Chino's cousin Pyungho kicks in the door, furious that Chino hasn't answered his calls. But Chino doesn't hear him, still focused on the metal. Irritated by the loud noise, Pyungho yells his name. Startled, Chino looks up and asks when he arrived. Pyungho asks what's he making, and Chino says it's a sashimi blade. Pyungho gets skeptical, but Chino clarifies it's just a fillet knife for a customer, nothing sketchy. Pyungho backs off, and Chino tells him not to flaunt being a detective. Pyungho hands over some homemade kimchi, and starts looking around the messy smithy. Big Bro's detective instincts are on high alert. He spots a Kentucky rifle in a corner and loses his temper, shouting why Chino is making something that's illegal in Korea. Chino says it's a prop for an overseas cosplayer, but Pyungho doesn't buy it. His trained eye immediately notices rifling in the barrel which no replica should have, and gets even angrier. He smacks Chino and grabs him by the collar, demanding answers. Chino says that he makes what clients want, but Pyungho warns he won't cover for him if he is working with criminals. Now even more suspicious, he demands to see Chino's storage. In the storage, Pyungho asks why Chino has so many chemicals and questions their legality. Chino nervously explains they're for etching and offers to show receipts. Pyungho warns him to stay in line. As they leave the storage, Pyungho notices a strange smell. Chino admits it's from his field, where he's been making potassium nitrate. Pyungho freezes, horrified by the mention of potassium nitrate. Chino tries to explain it's for testing the rifle since gunpowder is difficult to obtain, but Pyungho snaps, angrier than ever. He warns him to stop being reckless before things get worse. He reminds Chino of the mess he had to clean up last time, then orders him to plow the field immediately. As Pyungho leaves, he warns Chino that he'll return in 2 days to make sure the field's been destroyed. Alone again, Chino exhales in relief, grateful his cousin didn't discover everything. He pulls out a hidden box containing nitroglycerin, an extremely dangerous substance, and carefully inspects it, whispering that he must keep it hidden. Suddenly, everything around him starts shaking violently, an earthquake strikes. In a panic, Chino realizes the danger he's in as the box slips from his hand. Lunging forward, he manages to catch it, but the impact causes the box to open. The bottles fall out and shatter on the ground. The nitroglycerin causes a massive explosion, consuming the smithy in a fiery blast. Surrounded by fire, Chino realizes, everything he built to succeed just destroyed him. Chino slowly opens his eyes, feeling disoriented, and sees a man and a woman gazing down at him. The two rejoice as their newborn opens his eyes, and they admire his face. Chino wonders if these people saved him. He is confused by their unfamiliar dialect and unsure of what's happening. The woman gently lifts the restless baby, checking if he's comfortable. Chino realizes he's being lifted and gets even more confused. Suddenly, he lets out a cry, and the truth hits him. He died in the explosion and was reborn in a strange new world. Over the next 3 months, Chino overheard and learned about his new life. The clothing and surroundings hinted it was the early Joseon period. His father was royalty, but not close to the throne. Chino recalls a high school lesson about how non-ruling royals often stayed uneducated to avoid looking smarter than the king. Being the eldest son meant effortless privilege, no social climbing, no financial pressures. Perfect for Chino to skip studying and pursue his hobbies. Even in his former life, Chino always stood out. By age 5, he solved a Rubik's Cube, astonishing his parents and teachers. Their expectations grew even more when an IQ test confirmed he was a genius. His parents celebrated, but their excitement didn't move him. Chino was smart but not interested in studies. Teachers called him creative, not a textbook learner, fit to invent, but not for a 9-to-5 job. This worried his parents. They felt Chino's talents didn't fit the modern world. Their frustration grew as his grades fell, creating constant tension at home. Chino's refusal to follow tradition left his parents furious. He ignored his grades, focusing instead on his hobbies. He built steam engine models, crafted armor, and even forged swords with a swordsmith. One of his wildest projects was a waterplane. It flew over the Han River and made the news. People called him a genius, but his parents were furious. His father yelled, and his mother lost patience. To them, Chino wasn't brilliant, he was a son who refused to follow their rules. The gap between their expectations and Chino's reality grew wider over time as he isolated himself. But Chino stayed true to himself. When he got an invitation to America to help build a pirate ship replica, he left without telling his parents. What started as months became years. He worked on bigger projects, like a full-sized yacht for a rich client. When he finally returned home, his father slapped him in anger. The fight that followed was heated. Chino apologized and begged his parents not to argue because of him. His father, hoping to teach him discipline, forced him to join the military. Reluctantly, Chino agreed. After serving, Chino tried to live up to his parents' expectations. He passed a civil service exam and got a job. His family celebrated, thinking he had matured. But Chino felt empty. The pressure to conform wore him down and his mental health collapsed. His parents found him struggling with depression and taking pills. This shook his parents. They realized their mistakes and told Chino to live life his way. For the first time, he felt understood. He quit his job and bought his own smithy with the money he had saved. But fate had other plans. The explosion from nitroglycerin ended his life. When he opened his eyes, he was in the Joseon period, as a baby. Born into wealth and status, Chino could now freely explore the hobbies he once couldn't. He smiled, dreaming of a promising future. His mother noticed and assumed it was because he enjoyed the book recitals. She mistakenly believed he would grow up loving to study. Months passed, and Chino watched his world with growing curiosity. On the day of his Dole Janchi, his first birthday celebration, the house buzzed with activity. Guests filled the rooms, and his father stood in the center, confidently accepting congratulations. As guests bowed to his father, Chino realized his father's influence was greater than he thought. His suspicions grew when two important figures arrived, the Crown Prince and the Grand Prince. The Crown Prince lifted Chino and congratulated his father. When Chino heard the Crown Prince address his father as Chung Yang, realization hit him. His father wasn't just any royal, he was the Chad of all Chads, Sejong the Great, one of the most celebrated kings in Korean history. Discovering that his father was Sejong the Great, the king he learned about in school, creator of Hangul, and one of Korea's greatest kings, left Chino stunned. Chino tried to process this new reality, remembering a song about the Joseon kings. Suddenly it clicked, he was Moon, and his son would be Dan. Just as Chino was lost in thought, he was distracted by the sounds around him. It's Doljabi time, where a baby picks an object that predicts his future. His mother leaned in, encouraging him to choose something from the table. Before he could pick, Chino's attention shifted. Among the objects, a shiny glint from the Crown Prince's earrings caught his eye. Without hesitation, Chino stretched his arms toward them, trying to reach. His little noises filled the room as he squirmed in his chair, eager to get closer. Surprised, the Crown Prince picked up Chino, lifting him into his arms. Chino immediately reached for the earrings, fascinated by their shine. Everyone watched, entertained by his curiosity, turning the ceremony into a light-hearted moment as Chino continued to admire the craftsmanship of the earrings. Later, the three sons of King Taejong, Yang Yang, Huer Yang, and Chung Yang, sat together, discussing their thoughts on the kingdom, while Chino continued checking out the earrings the Crown Prince gave him. Yang Yang, the Crown Prince, was relaxed, his top buttons undone, which bothered Grand Prince Chung Yang, who preferred formality. As the discussion continued, Yang Yang sarcastically praised Chung Yang's academic achievements, hinting at how they exceeded average humans including himself. Chung Yang downplayed the compliment, suggesting that if Yang Yang focuses on scriptures he can easily surpass him. The discussion shifted as Yang Nyong confidently shared his vision of turning Joseon into a military powerhouse, restoring the glory of the three Han dynasties. But Chung Yong strongly disagreed, pointing out Joseon's lack of resources to challenge the Ming Empire. He argued that strengthening their foundation should come first. Yang Nyong dismissed these concerns and said he can easily achieve it in just 10 years. But Chung Yong said that 10 years was way too less. He reminded his brother of Ming's formidable strength, not just in soldiers but in the systems that supported their massive campaigns. Their administration and logistics, from farmland appraisal to census systems, were leagues ahead of Joseon. He stressed that even 30 years wouldn't be enough to match such an empire. Yang Nyong cut him off mid-sentence, brushing aside his concerns. He insisted that with just 2 years of reforms, one for farmland appraisal and another for the census, Joseon could stand ready. His confidence was unshaken. As the crown prince, he believed his role was undeniable, and he made it clear to Chung Yong that it was his duty to assist, not to challenge. The tension between the brothers reached a boiling point. Watching from the sidelines, Hua Yong tried to lighten the mood, commenting on the irony of such fiery tempers coming from the sons of a seasoned warlord. Chino was shocked to find out that even though Chung Yong eventually became King Sejong, he wasn't always supposed to be. But with time he understood more about the rivalry between Chung Yong and Yang Nyong. Their father, King Taejong, was powerful, but his unclear stance on succession had caused much tension in the family. King Taejong often mocked the idea of studying for kingship, believing that only a king's son should become king. But he soon praised Chung Yong for his dedication to learning, which contrasted with Taejong's earlier views. And when asked about his plans, Taejong remained quiet, leaving everyone uncertain. Yang Nyong, the crown prince, struggled to understand his father's unpredictable behavior. Feeling the pressure from his younger brother's intellect, Yang Nyong turned to hunting and indulgence to escape his responsibilities. Meanwhile, tensions rose among the court officials as they wanted to avoid a prince rebellion. Park Yoon, a high-ranking official, grew worried about the growing support for Chung Yong. He urged Lord Shimon, Chung Yong's father-in-law, to keep his son-in-law's ambitions in check. Shimon falsely assured him that he will talk to the Grand Prince. However, he had no intention of slowing Chung Yong's rise. As Park Yoon warned him and left in frustration, Shimon quietly sighed with relief, knowing that he would stand by his son-in-law's side. Eventually, King Taejong chose Chung Yong as the new crown prince. Not long after, the day arrived when Chung Yong was officially declared crown prince. Taejong told him to prepare for the throne and build strong bonds with his brothers. The queen also addressed the crown princess, telling her to manage the inner palace and maintain order. Both the crown prince and the crown princess promised to carry out their duties well. Taejong turned to Chino, noticing how bright and curious he was for his age. Chung Yong proudly mentioned how Chino had shown an interest in learning. Taejong praised Chino, calling him a blessing to the royal family. But Chino wasn't fully focused. His mind wandered to some lessons from his old teacher, Master Sumchenpo, who often spoke about Taejong and his wife's strained relationship, a mix of love and ambition that had led to tragedy, including the destruction of the queen's family. Taejong asked the crown princess about her father, Shimon. Though polite, his suspicion was clear. The crown princess grew nervous, which didn't go unnoticed by Chino. Taejong's veiled comments felt like warnings, leaving crown princess uneasy. She said that she will convey the message. But Chino feared all this could lead to bloodshed. 2 months later, Taejong stepped down, officially making Chung Yong King Sejong. Even in retirement, Taejong stayed deeply involved in court affairs, especially watching Sejong's in-laws. His suspicions grew when reports surfaced of a private meeting between Shimon's brother, Shim Jong, and Minister of War Kung Songan. During the meeting, Taejong was criticized for limiting the new king's authority by holding on to power even after stepping down. Furious, Taejong ordered their capture. The punishment was swift. Kung Songan was executed, Shimon got life in prison, and many members of Chino's maternal family were sold as slaves. Sejong stayed calm through the purge. Even as his new queen, his wife, cried over her family's fate, he remained composed. Chino watched, wondering if he should intervene. He was regretful, because if his maternal relatives had been reliable they could have become strong allies. However, he decided not to act. It was clear Taejong and Sejong had an agreement, and interfering would disrupt how history was meant to unfold. After the purge, unrest spread in court. Ministers argued that a queen from such a family shouldn't rule. Sejong silenced them with a warning, even threatening to return the throne to Taejong. Taejong himself intervened, declaring it wrong to dethrone a queen who had legitimate heirs. Chino observed it all in silence. He admired Sejong's cool-headedness but couldn't shake the thought that his father's only goal, like Taejong's, was to strengthen royal power. A few days later, an envoy from the Ming Empire arrived, questioning Taejong's sudden abdication, but Sejong assured them that the transition went smoothly. Sejong knew the Ming envoy would only believe him if he went for OA invasion and the conquest of Tushima Island because Taejong controlled the military. But he wished he had more time and resources. Chino, meanwhile, tried to recall what he'd learned about the invasion in his past life. He wondered if it had been only a partial success. Sejong noticed Chino reaching for a scroll and was very happy. He encouraged Chino to study if he wants to understand national affairs, which brought back Chino's old fears of studying. Sejong called for the royal secretary, who enthusiastically whisked Chino away. Our boy was filled with despair, imagining a life consumed by studies and little else. Determined to avoid a miserable fate, Chino knew he had to make a plan to get out of the situation. He knew Sejong wasn't just a great king but a true innovator. The Korean alphabet system, the hemispherical sundial and the divine mechanical arrows were all his creations. But Sejong also fostered talent, supporting some of the most brilliant engineers, inventors and astronomers in history. Inspired, Chino decided he needed to gather talented craftsmen. Even if their skills weren't perfect, he could help refine their work. His plan was simple: show his father completed inventions to earn support and funding. Chino understood that a little studying was unavoidable. To hold his ground against ministers in debates, he had to know his material. But he vowed to keep his studies to a minimum, focusing instead on building a network. He decided his first step was to charm the attendants responsible for his education. These individuals would later hold influential positions, so gaining their loyalty early was crucial. Chino smiled at the thought of turning these officials into future slaves who would listen just to him. Filled with determination, Chino was ready to execute his plan, pursue his nerdy dreams, and build a creative life. The next morning Chino was out for a walk. As they passed the bushes, a foul smell hit him. It was awful. He couldn't stand it. He thought to himself that this palace was disgusting. It was making him sick. Suddenly some court ladies passed by and greeted him. Chino nodded at them, telling them to keep working. But then he noticed the smell again. He turned around and searched for the source. He saw a woman with stains on her dress. His frustration grew. He thought that this kingdom needed to be turned upside down. Later, Chino was in his new classroom. The lesson ended, and the teachers looked at him, waiting. One of them asked if Chino had any questions, since it looked like Chino had something on his mind. Chino asked about what he saw earlier. He told them he saw a court lady with feces on her clothes. While he understood that everyone needs to relieve themselves, he thought it was unacceptable for clothes to be a problem. He asked the teachers what they thought about that. One teacher explained that clothes protect against the cold and heat. They also show a person's status. The teacher said it was normal to put up with these inconveniences. Chino didn't agree. He asked if it was right to judge someone's class by their clothes. He said there's a saying that a person's true value shows through, even if they wear rags. He suggested that it was this old way of thinking that needed to change. The teacher seemed uncomfortable and quickly tried to change the subject. Chino could tell they were avoiding his question. He thought to himself that these teachers were useless. He decided to ask another question. Chino talked about a letter he had seen about the conquest of Tsushima Island. The letter said everyone, from nobles to commoners, was involved in the battle, except for the farmers. Chino asked why they didn't have a strong, trained navy. Why weren't they training sailors? The teacher hesitated, looking for a way to answer. Before they could respond, Chino kept asking more questions. He wondered why they didn't move the people from Tsushima to the north of Joseon to protect them from pirates. If they had done that, he said, there would have been no need for the Tsushima Lord's special seal or title. The teacher was nervous. They tried to avoid answering, saying this wasn't something they should discuss. Chino felt his anger rising even more. He knew they were dodging his questions. He forced a smile but felt frustrated inside. After class, the teachers talked among themselves. They were amazed by Chino's intelligence. One of them commented that it was hard to believe such mature thoughts came from a 5-year-old. Another, who seemed more serious, suggested that since the king wanted Chino to focus on his studies, they could increase the intensity of his lessons. A third teacher joked about looking forward to the day Chino became king, but the first teacher reminded him to be careful with his words. Chino, however, wasn't in the mood to be flattered. Once he was alone, his frustration boiled over. He slammed a book onto the floor. To him, the teacher's explanations felt lazy and dismissive. He fumed, thinking they didn't take him seriously because he wasn't the crown prince yet. Their lack of effort only fueled his determination. He decided to speed up his plans. The moment he became crown prince, he vowed to make them regret underestimating him. Time moved quickly. By the time Chino was 7, he was officially proclaimed the crown prince. The ceremony was grand but exhausting. Though drained, Chino couldn't hide his joy. Finally, he had the status he needed to take action. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Later, he sat at his desk and began reviewing the policies his father had put in place. The salt monopoly caught his attention as a strong revenue source. But as he kept reading, more issues surfaced. The tribute system to the Ming Empire drained resources. Smuggling and land disputes created chaos. The business environment was weak. And worst of all, the government had no money. As Chino thought through potential solutions, he struggled with the traditional brush. The ink kept blotting, adding to his frustration. He realized that even as crown prince, his authority was still limited because of his young age. Tackling major reforms would take time. He needed to start with small changes instead. Then an idea struck him. If he couldn't fix the big problems yet, he could address smaller inconveniences. Those changes would lay the foundation for larger reforms. Feeling determined, he gripped the brush tighter. This brush was just the beginning of his plan to transform the kingdom. Chino's visit to the ordnance cell marked the start of his ambitious plan. The ordnance cell, a government weapons workshop, buzzed as workers hammered iron bars into shape. Chino walked through the area, soaking in the metallic clangs and the smell of hot iron. He thought about how much he had missed all this and decided to familiarize himself with the workers, knowing he would visit often due to his interests. The supervisor, Li Changgo, greeted him warmly, praising Chino's efforts for strengthening Joseon's defenses. Chino brushed off the compliment with a casual acknowledgement, then mentioned his real purpose for visiting. He asked Li to find the best craftsmen skilled in working with gold and iron. Li introduced a blacksmith, Master Gong, who addressed Chino with reverence. Chino dismissed the formality, emphasizing the importance of a smith's role in protecting the nation. He asked the Gong to take a closer look at a design he pulled from his pocket. The design was for a pen that would replace brushes. It worked by holding and releasing ink using capillary action. Gong studied the drawing and immediately identified the challenges, including regulating the ink flow and creating a fine slit for precision. Chino was impressed as he explained further, describing the need for a small bead on the nib to prevent tears in the paper. He asked Gong how narrow can he make the slit through which the ink flows. Gong said he could make it 0.15 mm wide. Chino was impressed but remained skeptical that such a precision was possible in handmade tools, especially since he wanted Gong to make dozens of pen quickly. Gong suggested using gold and silver to prevent rust and explained that with proper molds, they could produce 20 pieces a day. Chino stressed the importance of keeping stroke thickness to around 0.3 mm. Gong agreed to set the slit to this standard instead of 0.15 mm for now. When Chino asked for a timeline, Gong promised results in 2 days. Chino gave him 3, urging him to deliver the best possible work. 3 days later, Gong presented 5 nibs with different thicknesses for Chino to test. Chino eagerly tried them out, impressed with the results. He chose the best thickness and ordered 100 pens, requesting extra care for 10 of them. He also asked for plum blossom engravings on the gold pens and gave the smith 12 days to complete the task. As he was leaving, Chino emphasized the importance of flawless craftsmanship, as these pens were meant for the king, and asked for secrecy until the presentation. After Chino left, Li and the Gong reflected on his maturity, noting how impressive his speech and actions were for someone only 8 years old. The smith beamed with pride, holding a certificate signed by Chino declaring him the greatest craftsman of Joseon. He planned to mount it as a cherished heirloom, grateful for the honor bestowed upon him. 12 days later, the crown prince presented the gold pens to King Sejong. The king was immediately impressed as he tested one. The smooth flow of ink made writing easier on his wrist, and he praised the pens as an exceptional creation. The crown prince humbly received the compliments, bowing his head in gratitude. Sejong admired the plum blossom engravings on the pens, noting their elegance. Chino explained that the blossoms were a symbol of the royal family, making them a fitting addition. Curious, Sejong inquired about the inspiration behind the design. Chino, prepared with an answer, mentioned an observation he had made. He recalled how ink seemed to climb between the hairs of a brush, defying gravity. This peculiar sight sparked his curiosity, leading him to invent the pen after much thought. The king was thrilled, calling it a prime example of learning through experience. He marveled at how no one before had thought of such a concept despite using brushes for generations. Moved by Chino's intelligence and innovative thinking, Sejong asked the court historian to record the event. With the king's approval secured, Chino made a request. He instructed the head eunuch to bring in a box filled with gold pens. Chino suggested distributing them to historians and officials, as their demanding work required constant writing. The pens, he believed, would ease their task. The court was momentarily stunned by the generosity, but the ministers and officials soon expressed their joy. Sejong agreed wholeheartedly, asking the servants to distribute the pens as Chino suggested. He commented on the prince's thoughtfulness, remarking on how rare it was for someone so young to care deeply for others. The servants quickly followed the king's orders, handing out the pens. The ministers, now equipped with the new tools, praised the crown prince's foresight and care. Chino smiled, satisfied his creation would enhance his reputation as an innovator. After Chino presented the gold pens to the court officials, their popularity soared. Officials shared their excitement, discussing how the pens made their work easier. Writing documents required much less effort now. To complement the pens, Chino introduced portable pads to help military generals quickly write orders when needed. Sejong loved the idea, and ordered mass production of both items for distribution to military personnel. The pens began changing daily life in Joseon. One day, a minister was settling accounts with a merchant in the marketplace. As he used his gold pen to record purchases, the merchant noticed it. Curious, he asked if it was one of the famous gold pens everyone had been talking about. The minister confirmed, proudly mentioning that the king himself had distributed them. The merchant admired the plum blossom engraving and praised its beauty. The minister added that he loved the pen's portability, especially for urgent writing. He finished his business and left, unaware that his pen had sparked the merchant's mischievous interest, which is soon going to cause a lot of trouble. A few days later, some ministers informed Sejong that counterfeit pens were being sold on the streets. These imitations bore the royal emblem, causing concern. They expressed their outrage at the disrespect shown to such a significant creation and urged Sejong to declare that the crime must be dealt with strictly. The officials, in unison, called for strong action against the forgers. Sejong, valuing Chino's role as the creator, decided to involve him. He called Chino to the court to address the issue. Surrounded by officials, Chino listened as his father explained the situation. The ministers waited for his response as Chino appeared deep in thought, considering the best course of action. After a moment, Chino confidently suggested taking responsibility for handling the matter himself, and Sejong approved. 1 month later, Chino arrived at the Ministry of Taxation with the lead minister by his side. The Minister of Taxation had gathered all the merchant troop representatives. As Chino entered the hall, whispers spread through the room. The merchants bowed low, greeting him as the crown prince. Without delay, Chino held up a counterfeit pen, pointing out the missing plum blossom engraving. The merchants immediately understood the meeting's purpose. They denied any involvement, claiming their troops would never commit such a crime. Chino assured them he wasn't there to accuse anyone. He ordered them to stand, but fear kept them frozen in place. Chino was getting irritated by their disobedience, so the Minister of Taxation stepped in, urging the merchants to obey. They reluctantly took their seats, still trembling with fear. Chino got straight to the point. He announced plans to entrust the production of gold and regular pens to one of the merchant troops. The merchants exchanged nervous glances. He laid out the conditions. 20% of profits from gold pen sales would go to the government. Additionally, the pen's market price couldn't exceed 60% of production costs. One merchant, visibly uneasy, objected. He argued that wages and other expenses left little profit after the government's share. Chino cut him off mid-sentence, accusing him of lying. He explained that 20% of a 30% profit margin meant only 6% would go to the government, leaving plenty of room for a fair profit. Showing no tolerance for dishonesty, Chino ordered the guards to remove the merchant from the palace and revoke his bidding rights. The man's desperate pleas fell on deaf ears as the guards dragged him away. The rest of the merchants sat in stunned silence, avoiding Chino's gaze. Regaining his composure, Chino addressed the room again. He acknowledged the importance of merchants to the kingdom's prosperity and emphasized that their contributions were valued. However, he warned that deceit and greed would bring only disgrace and a loss of respect. He left them with a stern reminder to uphold integrity. The merchants, still shaken, bowed deeply and vowed to follow his rules. With the session concluded, Chino thanked eunuch Zhou for his assistance. Zhou, acknowledging Chino's efforts, wondered why the crown prince handled such matters personally. Chino explained that his youth left him with little choice but to be firm. Zhou accepted this and left, expressing his wish to recover from the intense day. Chino reflected privately, feeling satisfied with the progress. He was hoping it'd be smooth sailing from here on, but he wasn't aware of the numerous challenges that lie ahead. One day, a court official, Inspector General Sungam, urgently addressed the court, opposing the plans Chino has suggested. His sudden interruption caught Chino off guard, as this was the first time the young prince was going to face an opposition since reincarnating as Hyang. Recently, things had been progressing smoothly after his meeting with the merchant troops. The national budget, previously tight, began improving thanks to the successful sale of gold pens. Ministers celebrated the financial growth, and King Sejong praised Chino's efforts, recognizing the positive impact of trade on the kingdom. But, not everyone was pleased. Behind the scenes, dissatisfaction grew. Inspector Sungam voiced questioning the palace's involvement in commerce. He argued that merchants, as the lowest class, were being given undue favor. Some other officials shared his concerns. They blamed the king for taking advice from someone so young. Discussions of filing a formal appeal gained momentum, but before plans could materialize, news arrived of Taejong's passing on May 10, year 4 of Sejong. With the former king's death, the dissatisfied group decided to wait for another opportunity to act. Chino was aware of the growing tension, so he decided to prepare himself. He studied books from Europe, obtained through China, to back up his ideas. Knowing people might question his credibility, he planned to cite these books as his sources of inspiration if anyone doubted him. He knew he'd need to lie a lot, but was confident about it. One day, Chino proposed a significant change. He introduced Hindu-Arabic numerals, explaining their efficiency and practicality. King Sejong turned to his ministers for their opinions. The Minister of Taxation, Kim Jum, and the Minister of Personnel, Ha Zhou, supported the idea, agreeing that it would simplify calculations and record-keeping. Sejong approved a 1-month trial of the numerals for both departments. If successful, The system would be implemented everywhere. The court moved on to the next agenda, and Sejong asked Chino to remain for this discussion as well. The court official read aloud, explaining that King Sejong had ordered the ordnance cell to produce gold pens as a gift for the Emperor of Ming. Pleased with the pens, Emperor Yongle had sent a letter ordering King Sejong to send 10,000 gold pens as tribute. The court official then informed Chino that the national budget lacked the funds to fulfill the order. Chino thought for a moment before suggesting a bold idea: the government could run a business. The room went silent. Inspector General, standing nearby, immediately opposed the idea. He was shocked by Chino's advice. Sejong, however, calmly told him to remain quiet while Chino continued. Chino argued that since the emperor favored the pens, they were likely popular throughout the entire Ming Empire. With its vast territory and large population, the Ming Empire must have many more writers than Joseon, making it a lucrative market. So, they could sell more pens, beyond what the emperor had requested. He suggested contacting the merchant troupe to increase production and sell additional pens to the Ming Empire. Sejong looked to Kimjum, the Minister of Taxation, for his opinion. Kimjum agreed that the plan could bring in profit. Chino continued, saying merchants could accompany the royal envoys to Ming, paying rent in return. This would help cover the costs and bring in more revenue. But the Inspector General grew furious, insisting the plan would lead to excess wealth and luxury. He warned that this could lead to tyranny and ruin the kingdom as the people will drown in luxury. Other ministers, including the Minister of Rights, supported the inspector. They argued that merchants should not be part of the diplomatic mission, as it would hurt Joseon's dignity. He even questioned Chino's understanding of national affairs and diplomacy and suggested he should stick to studies. Chino responded confidently, asking Sejong if he could answer the objections. Sejong allowed him to speak. Chino sharply pointed out that the inspector's concern about wealth leading to tyranny was misguided. He asked if they were suggesting that the people should suffer in poverty. Our boy argued that it was better to bring in wealth from outside, instead of squeezing the people dry. The inspector, still serious but now questioning Chino respectfully, said, even if this plan worked, there was no guarantee it would succeed again. If it didn't, the people would bear the burden. Chino interrupted. He asked if the inspector only lived for today. He wondered how the inspector could be so sure that gold pens were a one-time sale and that merchants only sold gold pens. The inspector, now angry, asked if any high-ranking officials used gold pens. He said many had bought them out of curiosity, but they didn't measure up to wooden brushes and had become mere toys for children. Kimjum, the Minister of Taxation, interjected, correcting the inspector. He revealed that 400 gold pens were consumed at the government level, and more than 1,000 among the people, each month. The inspector, stunned and sweating, was at a loss for words. Chino, with a smirk, apologized, saying the gold pens seemed frivolous because they were made by a young kid. The boomer inspector bowed, apologizing for his rude remarks. Chino continued, speaking to the court. He said, for the sake of the people, the merchant's involvement was necessary. He asked for a book from his room. The book was called Geography of the World, one of the books Chino had collected from the envoys sent to the Ming Empire. It described the geography and products of Ming and nearby countries. Chino explained that the book mentioned how the Ming Empire and the Dai Viet Empire harvested more grain than Joseon and had a surplus. Meanwhile, in Joseon, many people suffered from hunger due to droughts and poor harvests. Chino argued that the profits from the envoys should be used to buy grain and help relieve the suffering of the people. The inspector, now even angrier, objected again. He argued that the true way of the king was to live honestly in poverty, with both ruler and people content with what they had. Chino, furious, shot back, questioning if the inspector thought anyone would want to live in poverty. He pointed out that the people were suffering, dying from hunger and cold. He said that no one would praise a king for allowing his people to starve. He argued that no parent would stand by while their child went hungry. As the father of the people, the king should do something to help. Sejong, listening to his son, burst into applause. He knew the MC was cooking. The court was stunned. The historian quickly wrote down the moment for the records. Sejong, realizing he had overreacted, cleared his throat and tried to calm down, but his pride in Chino was clear. After watching Sejong's excitement, both Chino and the court officials were left speechless. So, Sejong settled down, composed himself, and then nodded for Chino to continue. Chino, feeling the pressure, resumed. He argued that while the nobles could suppress their hunger with reason, the common people, lacking education, couldn't do the same. Chino pointed out that if they truly wanted to cultivate virtue, they should ensure the people's basic needs were met first. King Sejong enthusiastically agreed, but the court remained silent, once again stunned by his continued excitement. Chino, in his mind, noted that it was time to wrap things up before his father's emotions got the better of him. Chino continued, reminding everyone that the people's hearts were the key to heaven's favor. He argued that no matter how much virtue they tried to cultivate, it wouldn't matter if the people were suffering. He also mentioned that even when disasters like droughts or epidemics happened, the ministers blamed it on the king's lack of virtue, asking him to cultivate more virtue first. Chino questioned whether this was the right order. Shouldn't they prepare for droughts, epidemics, and famines ahead of time? Wasn't that the correct way to handle things? He turned to the inspector general, asking if they believed that the Joseon dynasty lacked virtue because of difficult decisions made by previous kings. The ministers were stunned. Even the inspector general began to sweat. The atmosphere was tense, and everyone was on edge. Chino continued, addressing the older officials who had been around since the previous dynasty. He asked them if they thought King Taezhou lacked virtue for establishing the new dynasty after being a subject of Goryeo. Or if King Taejong, his grandfather, lacked virtue for drawing his sword against his brothers. Or his father, King Sejong, lacked virtue for taking the throne instead of his uncle, the oldest son. The inspector general quickly interrupted, insisting that wasn't the case. He begged for mercy, saying the ministers had never thought such things. King Sejong, sitting quietly, turned his gaze to the ministers. In a calm voice, he said that Chino was too harsh. He apologized and asked for forgiveness from the ministers. Turning to his son, Sejong quietly warned him to be more careful with his words next time. Chino bowed his head, in acknowledgement. Sejong then addressed the ministers, his tone shifting to one of authority. He agreed that helping the people should come first. He also confirmed that the tribute requested by the Ming emperor would follow the crown prince's plan. The ministers bowed and agreed. Sejong then asked Chino if he had anything else to add. Chino spoke up, suggesting that giving grain to the people in exchange for work, rather than just donating it, would be more appropriate. Sejong was surprised and asked about the idea of giving grain for work. Chino asked the ministers for their opinion. The ministers agreed that it was an excellent idea. Sejong then allowed the crown prince to return. He also asked him to join the political discussions after the ancestral rites were completed. Chino, grateful for the opportunity, thanked his father for allowing him to participate in the discussion. Sejong decided to end the morning assembly. He told the ministers they could leave. They all acknowledged the king's command. But before they left, Sejong added that he had to rethink about what the ministers really thought of the Joseon dynasty. The mood suddenly shifted, and the ministers started to tremble in fear. One by one, the ministers began to beg for mercy, insisting they never thought such disloyal thoughts. Sejong, angered by the situation, ordered them to return to their work. Outside the palace, as the ministers were leaving, they started talking to each other about what just happened. One of them commented that even a small mistake could lead to disaster. Another minister remarked that Sejong had the blood of previous kings, and it was dangerous to underestimate him. The inspector, stern, warned them to be careful with their words. He had only spoken out of concern for the future of the kingdom. But the uncertainty hung in the air as he wondered if things would end badly for them. Another minister asked what they should do next. The inspector replied that if things didn't improve, they might have to submit their resignation letters. He reminded them that even if the king was wrong, it was their duty to point it out. The inspector was determined to guide Sejong to become a wise ruler, one who would listen to his subjects. Back in the palace, the queen spoke to Sejong about the crown prince. She had heard that Chino caused some trouble during the assembly. Sejong reassured her that it wasn't the crown prince who caused the disturbance but himself. He admitted he had let his emotions get the best of him, just like when he was a young prince. The queen laughed, finding it amusing that she couldn't see that side of Sejong. Sejong, embarrassed, smiled and agreed with her. She mentioned that his complexion seemed better now, and he happily acknowledged it. The queen encouraged Sejong to stop worrying about what historians might say and to prioritize his comfort. Sejong agreed and mentioned that he had asked the crown prince to join the political discussions after the ancestral rites. The queen was concerned since Chino was still young, but Sejong felt more confident after seeing how Chino handled the situation in the assembly. He admitted that Chino was maturing quickly and seemed more like a man in his 40s than a young prince. The queen pointed out that Sejong had once worried that Chino's intelligence might create distance between them, but now Sejong seemed more at ease. Sejong, feeling reassured, called for the chief eunuch. He asked him to leave for a while, as he wanted to be alone. The chief eunuch respectfully obeyed. Sejong sat in silence, deep in thought. He wondered if he should deal with the ministers and inspectors himself, or if he should let things settle on their own. His mind turned to the state of the palace, and how it still echoed with the presence of his father's subjects. Sejong knew he needed his own subjects, those who would truly listen to him. After Sejong's order, the Ministry of Taxation began producing gold pens for Emperor Yongle. However, they were struggling to meet the deadline. Sejong addressed the issue in court, questioning the delay. A minister explained that the merchant troupe responsible claimed it was impossible to meet the deadline. Chino, observing, anticipated this problem due to Joseon's current workshop conditions. He requested permission to summon a representative from the merchant troupe for clarification. His suggestion surprised Sejong. The inspector general opposed the idea, arguing that lowly merchants shouldn't be allowed to enter the palace where matters of national importance are discussed. Sejong, irritated, rebuked the inspector for rejecting the idea without offering alternatives. He ordered the representative to be brought in. When the merchant representative arrived and bowed before Sejong, the king instructed him to answer Chino's questions. Chino asked about the delay. The representative explained that making a gold pen required meticulous work and great concentration, limiting the speed of production. Chino confirmed that each pen was crafted by a single artisan. The representative agreed. This confirmed Chino's suspicion about the time-consuming process. He suggested that speaking directly with the craftsman might provide better insight. Once again, the inspector general protested. He insisted that bringing craftsmen into the court would disrespect the sanctity of the place. Sejong's frustration boiled over. He questioned why summoning anyone for the nation's benefit would be wrong. The inspector's persistence angered Sejong further. The king slammed his fist, warning the inspector to stay silent. He threatened to question the inspector's loyalty if the interruptions continued. Silenced and visibly shaken, the inspector stepped back. Sejong, still furious, ordered the craftsman to be summoned immediately. Chino met with the craftsman who confirmed they made each gold pen from start to finish individually. He proposed dividing the tasks, one person to flatten the gold plate, another to shape it, and a third to engrave the patterns. Though hesitant at first, the craftsman agreed it could work once they adapted. Chino explained the idea of dividing labor to increase speed and efficiency. Sejong, impressed by his son's idea, encouraged the craftsman to proceed with the new method. After they left, Sejong asked Chino where he got the idea. Chino shared how he observed the royal kitchen staff dividing their work, which inspired the concept. Sejong praised him, marveling at how Chino noticed value in overlooked places. The ministers agreed with the suggestion, applauding Chino's brilliance. However, the inspector general raised a concern, criticizing Chino for focusing on minor matters instead of studying wisdom. Sejong sharply defended his son, arguing that no matter how small, understanding overlooked issues could lead to national prosperity. Sejong questioned the inspector's loyalty, asking if he doubted the legitimacy of the king and past rulers. The inspector denied any disloyalty, apologizing for his words. Despite this, the historian noted that while the inspector's remarks were narrow-minded, the king's aggressive response also lacked dignity. Later, back at his residence in the East Palace, Chino reflected on the intense court session. He felt relieved that his idea worked but realized his father had been calling on him more frequently. He wondered if standing out had backfired, making him more involved in court matters. Chino recalled learning about Adam Smith's concept of division of labor in his past life, a system shaped by agreements between monarchs and merchants. He considered Joseon's political structure, where kings struggled to maintain power against officials aiming for more influence. He resolved to support Sejong's authority while preparing for his future. Chino decided the first step was to strengthen the throne and secure resources by filling the national treasury. This, he believed, would help stabilize the kingdom and create a foundation for future reforms. Recognizing that the ministers and officials preferred a weak king to gain real power while ignoring the people's needs, he resolved to counter this. To solidify his father's authority across the kingdom, Chino knew a strong and centralized capital was essential. The next day Chino returned to the court to share his new plans. While Sejong was genuinely curious, the ministers were nervously thinking, what's Chino come up with now? Chino presented his first proposal to fill the treasury, securing exclusive rights to sell gold pens in the Ming Empire. He pointed out the emperor's demand for more pens, which showed their high value in Ming. With the empire being much larger than Joseon, Chino believed the demand would be massive. The inspector didn't like this, but he didn't say anything. Next, Chino brought up the problem of Ming envoys demanding excessive supplies. He suggested obtaining a decree to limit their demands when visiting Joseon. The inspector general couldn't hold himself back this time and immediately objected, calling it disrespectful for a tributary state to protest. Chino challenged this, asking if it was acceptable for a larger nation to exploit a smaller one. The inspector argued that cutting gifts would provoke backlash, but Chino didn't relent. He reminded everyone that the gifts came from the hard work of the people. With the demands increasing, Chino warned that this would lead to food shortages and reduced taxes. The ministers exchanged uncertain glances, while Sejong quietly considered Chino's words. The inspector dismissed Chino's concerns, claiming he lacked experience and understanding of national affairs. He explained that the envoys, being eunuchs and thus closest to the emperor, could harm Joseon if offended. Chino interrupted angrily, questioning if the emperor was foolish enough to trust mere rumors. The inspector tried to defend himself, claiming that Chino misunderstood him due to his youth. He argued that Chino's lack of experience was leading to risky decisions that could result in significant losses in pursuit of minor gains. Chino was absolutely furious, and he demanded that the inspector stop dismissing his opinions because of his young age, and in return, accused the officials of allowing Joseon's wealth to be drained away. He pointed out that the sheer amount of goods taken by the Ming envoys filled entire roads with carts, depleting the kingdom's resources. He called out the inspector for prioritizing submission to eunuchs over the welfare of the people. Drawing on Manhwa's teachings, he argued that true leaders must embody benevolence, integrity, and virtue, not grovel and offer wealth to eunuchs. Mocking them, he asked if they still dared to call themselves great men. Finally, Qino turned to Sejong and requested to lead the next envoy mission to Ming. He vowed to petition the emperor to stop the excessive demands. Despite being young, he declared his determination and confidence to protect Joseon's interests. Sejong, super tensed, pointed out the dangers of the journey to Beijing. Qino insisted that the situation was both a crisis and an opportunity for Joseon. He believed taking action now could secure the nation's future. Sejong, overwhelmed, dismissed Qino, telling him to return to his residence. Eunuchs were ordered to escort Qino back. Shocked and desperate, Qino pleaded with his father to reconsider. His cries for permission echoed as the eunuchs pulled him away. Qino returned to his residence in the East Palace, and was extremely furious. He dismissed everyone, needing space. As he calmed himself, he knew that Boomer Inspector was looking down on him because of his age and something had to be done about it. The constant criticism from Sungum had pushed him too far. Despite this setback, Qino resolved not to back down. Calling for his eunuch, Qino announced his plan to leave for the Ming Empire immediately. The eunuch, startled, questioned the sudden decision, but Qino was firm. Determined, he ordered preparations, swearing to take action against those who underestimated him. Meanwhile, at the royal court, the ministers continued opposing Qino's earlier proposal. They pleaded with Sejong to reject it. Sejong, holding back anger, reminded them of Qino's efforts. He revealed that the boy barely slept, spending his time planning for the kingdom's future. Yet all the ministers did was object repeatedly. As the ministers expressed guilt, a eunuch burst in with alarming news. The crown prince was preparing to leave immediately for the Ming Empire. Shock swept the court. Sejong, furious and confused, demanded an explanation. Hearing that Qino felt urgency to act for the nation, Sejong's temper boiled over. Sejong, accompanied by his ministers, walked toward the East Palace. On the way, he spotted eunuchs hurrying off and stopped them. Recognizing them as servants of the crown prince, he demanded to know where they were going. The eunuchs, visibly nervous, explained they were heading to the royal secretariat to record items sent to the Ming envoys since King Taizhou's reign. Hearing this, Sejong exploded with anger, furious at his son's actions. At the queen's chambers, a court lady burst in with urgent news. The crown prince was packing to leave for the Ming Empire. Shocked, the queen questioned why. The servant explained Qino's reasoning: to stop the excessive demands from the envoys, since the ministers had rejected his plans. Hearing that Sejong was already on his way to the East Palace, the queen panicked and ran after him, calling out her son's name. In the East Palace, Sejong confronted Qino. The king was livid, demanding to know why his son was acting so impulsively. Qino stood his ground, claiming it was his duty as crown prince. As the argument raged inside, the ministers and the queen stood outside, anxiously listening to the father and son's heated exchange. Qino argued that age was not an excuse to avoid doing what was right. Sejong, exasperated, scolded him for being reckless. Qino declared he wanted to act as an elder brother to the people, comparing their suffering to wails of despair. He couldn't ignore it. Sejong, growing angrier, ordered a whip and fulling block, saying that a child's mistakes must be corrected strictly. The queen rushed in, pleading for leniency, reminding Sejong that Qino was only 9 years old. Sejong dismissed her pleas, insisting discipline was necessary. The eunuchs escorted the queen out as she begged Sejong to reconsider. Sejong turned back to Qino and listed his faults: arrogance, disrespect toward retainers, and disregard for orders. He began the punishment, whipping Qino on the calves. Outside, the queen sobbed as the eunuchs restrained her. The ministers stood silently, some appearing satisfied while others looked uneasy. After the punishment, Sejong ordered the royal physician to treat Qino's injuries. Exhausted, he instructed the queen to care for their son and left with the eunuchs. As Sejong departed, he scolded the ministers, calling them petty for failing to match a child's resolve. The ministers, shocked by the crown prince's actions, whispered among themselves, only to be silenced by a stern reminder that the queen might overhear. The queen, furious and tearful, lashed out at them for their incompetence, stating she would never forget the day's events. The ministers, deeply ashamed, bowed and apologized. Later that evening, the queen punished Qino herself, hitting him as he lay across her lap. She scolded him for causing trouble and warned him never to repeat such actions. Qino cried out in pain, inwardly lamenting his situation. As he endured the punishment, he noticed the queen crying even as she struck him. She tearfully confessed that she had no one left but him and his sibling. Realizing her pain, Qino felt a pang of guilt. He apologized, promising not to upset her again. At the royal court, Sejong addressed his ministers with a serious expression. He ordered the eunuch to bring the documents Qino had prepared. As Sejong reviewed them, his anger grew. The records showed how much wealth had been sent to the Ming Empire over the years, at least 2 months' worth of the annual budget in the smallest cases and up to 5 months in the worst. Including what was taken from small villages, the total amounted to a year's budget. Sejong angrily confronted the ministers, questioning why none of them had recognized the issue that even the young crown prince had identified. The ministers remained silent, their heads bowed in shame. Sejong's frustration boiled over as he demanded an envoy and aid be decided within 2 hours. He warned that failure to comply would lead to charges of treason. Later that night, Sejong stood on the balcony, gazing at the moon. The queen approached him, unable to sleep and concerned about the day's events. She hesitated but asked why he had punished Chino so harshly. Sejong explained that while Chino was clever, overconfidence could alienate others, including the ministers. He believed a leader must earn trust to care for his people. Sejong acknowledged Chino's potential but said he must guide him carefully to ensure he followed a righteous path. The queen, understanding his intentions, smiled softly. Together, they looked at the calm night sky, finding peace after the storm. A few days later, Chino was sitting on the palace stairs, watching his younger brothers, Yu and Yang, play. He looked sad and worried. But it wasn't because of his father's punishment, but because he knew about Yu's future, that the innocent-looking child would one day bring chaos to the palace. Yu, later known as Seijo, the 7th king of Joseon, would kill Chino and his son and then poison Yang. Chino recalled his old teacher had spoken about Seijo's dark legacy, which included betrayal of family and the damage to the progress of Joseon dynasty. Most historians viewed him negatively. Watching Yu play, Chino felt the weight of what was to come. He decided he needed to act before any signs of that future appeared. An idea struck him. Early education and repetition could shape Yu's character. Determined, Chino decided to guide Yu closely, even if it meant making him work under his influence forever. Later, Chino approached his brothers, greeting them warmly. He asked Yu to join him in studying, hoping to monitor and shape his learning. Yu, however, was uninterested and said he preferred to learn on his own. He walked away, taking Yang with him. Chino was left stunned by the rejection but quickly masked his frustration. As Yu ran off, the queen called after him, telling him to be careful while running. But suddenly, something stopped Yu. He overheard some court ladies discussing the crown prince, praising Chino's intelligence and skills. At first, Yu thought they were talking about him, but his excitement turned to anger when they compared him unfavorably to his older brother. They thought even though Yu was intelligent, Chino was a genius and a prodigy. This made Yu extremely angry. The queen overheard their gossip and scolded them harshly, but Yu, already hurt by their words, told his mother they should leave, feeling that scolding the court ladies was pointless, showing no further interest in pursuing the matter. As they were leaving, Yu was full of self-doubt, questioning how he was worse than his older brother. Our video ends here. If you liked it, leave a like. See you next time, bye bye.